Sarfraz, I'm just wondering, now that like this would be like the culmination of your dreams, you've written a memoir that turned into a movie that Bruce Springsteen loves. Was there any part of you that says like, now what? And would you want to continue in the movie industry?
So you really depressed me.
Actually, Sarah, could you repeat her question? So
she's basically saying, what the fuck are you going to do next?
Now that your dream has come true.
Yeah. No, it's a fair point. It is a fair point. To be honest, I don't quite know why I'm here, because after last night, I was like, I just need to come back to Britain. I've just had Springsteen turn up to our film premiere, and he's turned up to sing. So, I think the serious answer is that I think one should spend some time being grateful.
And next, Aaron Phagura, who played Roops, who introduced Javed to Bruce. Aaron. And next, Viveik Kalra Javed. So, before I open the questions to you guys, let me ask Gurinder.
I was at school. I'd been introduced to him through my Saturday job where I worked in a record store at Harrods. And what introduced me to Bruce was an English chap who lived there, who worked at the shop, said, have you heard of Bruce Springsteen? And I said, yes, but I'm not a rocker. And I had him down as a heavy metal guy. And he said, no, you need to, he isn't that, you need to hear him. And he opened the album Born to Run, and I was like amazed by the image, because it was a white dude and a black dude being really happy together and smiling, and that was a very rare sight. And the only other time I'd seen that was with Casey and the Sunshine Band, black and white together, and so I was intrigued, and of course went home, listened to the album. I was mesmerized by the saxophone, which led me to the guitar, which led me to the words and storytelling of Bruce Springsteen. And then a bit later on, I read an article in a newspaper about Bruce Springsteen by a journalist called Sarfraz Manzoor.
Who's right here.
Who's here. And I was like, huh? There's another Asian person in Britain that likes Bruce? Boy, was I wrong. He was another Asian person who was obsessed with Bruce. And so that's how Sarfraz and I met. And we were friends.
And that was when?
I'd say early 90s, was it? Late 90s. And then Sarfraz said that he was going to write a memoir. And so he wrote his wonderful memoir, Greetings from Asbury Park, Race, Religion and Rock and Roll. And it was about him growing up in Luton.
It's very sweet. By the way, we've been doing this for 3 weeks now, so my challenge just for myself is to answer each question you ask in a different way than the way I've done for the last 3 weeks.
Is everyone asking the same questions?
We'll see. But it was very sweet. I just had an hour free before now, and there was Shakespeare & Co. and Barnes & Noble, and they both had copies of the book, so I just voluntarily offered to sign them. They didn't actually ask me to, but I did anyway. So I wrote the book in 2007, and I knew Gurinder, and I was like, it would be so cool if this could possibly make a film, and the only person who could make it would be Gurinder. So, because she'd done Bend It Like Beckham, she knew the world, she was part of that culture, and also you kind of need to have trust when you're doing a story that's sort of about yourself. Somebody could really screw it up because they could just say, I'm going to take the story, thanks very much, and I'll do what I want with it. And I needed someone who I could trust that was going to do the things that you needed to make the film, but not totally screw me over. And I trusted Gurinder. So we started talking about it.
And I was a Bruce fan.
But you've already alluded to that, so I don't want to repeat that.
I mean, for you, the trust of the
because ultimately, you couldn't make something unless you really knew the details of the story, and you can't fake that. So that was 2007. And then the big question was, how do we get Springsteen on board? Because if you don't have Springsteen, it's going to be a silent movie. And so then 2010, 3 years later, what we'll do this time is we'll swap it around. So I'll do the main bit again. So in 2010, we had this screening for this film called The Promise, which was a documentary that Springsteen made. And Gurinder got a VIP invite. And rather than taking the person you would normally think of taking, which would be her husband, she took me, which was one of the wisest decisions she's made in recent years. And so we went to this thing. I took my book with me because I didn't know if Bruce was going to be there. And so we're both standing there, really excited. And then what happened?
And then across the room, as Bruce walked down the carpet, Sarfraz was trying to get his eye. And because there aren't many people that look like Sarfraz at the front of Bruce concerts, tall, thin, Pakistani with an afro. Bruce had come to recognise him being at the front of these concerts, but also recognise him hanging around hotels and cars for many years. And then he caught Sarfraz's eye, and as he saw him, he walked over and he said, "Hey man, I read your book, it's really beautiful." And Sarfraz was like obviously shocked, had a meltdown, and was like, "Oh my God, you read my book, how did you read it? Who gave it to you? You took the time to read it." Meanwhile, I was standing there watching this, and Bruce is right here, and in my head, I was like, okay, this is it. I've got like maybe 3 seconds to do a movie deal with Bruce Springsteen right now before his team move him on, because they were already trying to move him on by that point. And then I just lost all my cool and I just blurted out who I was, what I'd done, and so glad that he liked the book. And I just said, "I'm Gurinder Chadha, I'm in Better Like Beckham, thank you, we really want your support, we want to turn it into film, will you help us?" And he looked at Sarfraz and he looked at me and he said, "Sounds good, talk to John." And John Landau was behind him, his manager. Bruce was duly moved on, and as he was walking away, we were still trying to talk to him, going, "So glad you're here in London, thanks so much."
Let's talk later.
Yeah. And meanwhile, John said, "What are you guys talking about?" And Sarfraz gave him the book and said, "Book, he likes my book, and we want to make a movie." And then we exchanged numbers with Tracy Nurse, who I kept in touch with, and she said, "He likes the idea, you should go ahead and go and write the movie."
What really interested me is that I lived through the 1980s, I listened to Bruce Springsteen at the same time I was listening to the Talking Heads, and I understood Thatcherism, so I thought, but I didn't realize it was the prelude to the times we're living, the Brexit, Trump times we're living in now. And what really struck me and moved me about the movie is how unifying it was and not how polarizing it is. Because those times were so polarizing and today seems so polarizing. And this movie made me feel unified. And I want to ask Aaron, is this me? Am I doing this? I want to ask Aaron and Viveik,
This is down.
One of the mics is popping.
did Viveik die?
He's a bit nervous being in your country over the last few days.
Back up here.
Man, you can't look like us and hear a loud noise like that.
So true.
Okay, that's a new thing. We've not said that in 3 weeks. That's a new thing.
Okay, Aaron and Viveik, how did the theme of the movie strike you, and why did you want to be part of this?
Hello. So I remember it came in as an email, which is very boring, but it came in as an email, and I saw the project sort of listed, and it says like director, blah, 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 and I saw the director, and I was like, even if it's absolute shite, I'm going to go in and audition. And
He hasn't used that word in interviews.
I know. Thankfully, it wasn't absolute shite, and it was sort of wonderful and magnetic and heartwarming. And the script sort of resonated with me more than anything else I'd ever read, which was funny because, like, the character, that lad you see jumping up behind me, is not someone that I can relate to at all in terms of his circumstances. Being 16 as a British Pakistani in Luton and working class with your dad working in a factory and you having a pretty bleak, terrible life is something that I could not relate to in the slightest. And these circumstances were not, ideal, to be looking like this and having the life beaten out of you every day is really not the one. So people have been asking, would you go back to the 80s, with all these hairdos and costumes? And I'm like, no, because for us lot, it was more than that, and it was a different time and a time that was pretty harrowing. Sorry, I was quite depressing.
Yeah, I mean, you turn it on. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Take Sarfraz.
See, my upbringing was a little bit different because I did grow up in a predominantly white neighbourhood. And it was quite racist growing up. The only difference was, as you see in the film, Javed's taught to kind of keep his mouth shut because, like, you're on their territory, So I think I'm blessed that I was born in a different generation. But one thing that attracted me the most to the role was the fact that I feel like I'm speaking on generations before me. I'm speaking on what my parents and my grandparents had to go through. Because a lot of what you saw there, that they dealt with that on a day-to-day basis too.
I know that some people in the audience, or many people in the audience, might know you from Doctor Who. But, Javed, you are a fairly new actor. In fact, I think most of what you've done has been for Gurinder, either on TV or this movie, correct?
I think we're both on the sort of similar level playing field. I was lucky that my first sort of job was on a TV show on ITV in the UK called Next of Kin, opposite Archie Punjabi.
Gurinder also.
Yes.
Gurinder also
yes.
shepherded.
But yeah, if you don't know who that is, if you've seen The Good Wife, she's Kulvinder in The Good Wife. Fucking amazing, isn't it?
And she's the older sister in Bend It Like Beckham. She's the one who gets married in Bend It Like Beckham.
But more recently, The Good Wife.
Yes.
But yeah, so what was odd was like seeing Archie the other day at the UK premiere, like a couple of years after filming my first thing with her, and then at the thing with yourself. It was a crazy sort of moment. But yeah, I was in that. She saw me in that. She knew the editor. Asked for some stuff. I think she said that there wasn't as much for you to see in me there. So you had to call me in to audition. I did audition 3 times. Madly intimidating, of course. But yeah, me and Aaron were saying we did our best rendition of Born to Run. Which is obviously one of the most iconic songs of all time.
To this
we
day,
didn't realise that.
That is like the weirdest audition.
I know.
What made it weird?
We had to sing Born to Run, beginning to end. We literally just met her. Like I was, I grew up being a fan before I was even an actor. So, I got in the room with her the first ever time for a film that she was making. I kept getting called back, and this was like the final audition. And I did get pre-warned, but I was just hoping maybe she'll be like, don't worry about it. Like, we'll do the 2 scenes of dialogue, don't worry about the Born to Run. And then I've done the 2 scenes, and then she bangs out a speaker, and she's like, okay, cool, beginning to end. We're doing Born to Run, so...
I don't want to hog you guys.
I hadn't heard any Springsteen before that, so that was a pretty good test in an audition to see how they owned the song in character. And they both did really well because they're sat here now.
I'd like to open this to the audience for your questions and comments. I'm sure you have many.
Good crowd.
This woman right here, yes, you. Can you stand up and really project?
Okay. I just noticed from the beginning it seemed like a lot more like a musical, and then it got sort of like it kind of went away, if not from the music, and he spoke sort of by with his own words and less from Springsteen. Is that was kind of deliberate? I mean, because the staging was really sort of so fun, and it just like the big scene when they're singing in the marketplace. So did you conceive of it kind of as a musical altogether?
I think, can I just say really quickly, I think it's quite cool that like the character goes from being passive in his like love for Springsteen, also like enjoys listening to it, but then like actively like changes his relationships with people through the words of Springsteen as his ammunition.
Yeah, it was a quasi musical. It's not a Hollywood musical. It's not a Bollywood musical. It's a kind of British quasi musical, and the idea is that the music is very much part of the story. It's like a character. The lyrics, the words of Springsteen are almost like dialogue. And when he sings along to Springsteen. He doesn't quite break out into song like a musical. So the presence of the songs is there as an integral part of the character's development and the narrative of the story, as opposed to let's break down for a song. And so that was all very carefully choreographed and managed in terms of when he did what with the music, so that the idea was that you understood how the music was impacting him as you go through the story, and how Bruce's words are impacting him. So the music that you hear at the beginning is kind of more background music, 80s songs, but then the first time he hears Bruce with Dancing in the Dark is a very powerful moment where I had to make the words really be emotional and really matter. And I couldn't just play it without showing you the words, because I couldn't afford for you at that point in the story to not make the link with what he was actually hearing of Bruce and how he was relating it to his life, which is why I picked out certain words and not other words, why he doesn't sing along to those songs at the end, why he makes the statement at the end when he realises his promised land is his writing. And then going on from there, obviously, he has the encounter with the right-wing racist guys in the cafe, and he's been listening to Badlands, and then through Bruce, he's able to stand up to the guys in the cafe, and so at that moment, they don't break into song, but they kind of speak to the racist guys with Bruce's words, to the ones who had a notion deep inside, that it ain't no sin to be glad to be alive. Again, those are Bruce's words that he wrote for Badlands, but they fit exactly at that moment when they need the strength to stand up in a way that they haven't till now. And so that's not really a musical in a conventional way. That was invented. That was a creation to bring the music to the fore in a much more significant
Bring the
way.
words to life, I think.
Yeah, bringing the words to life, but giving the words meaning. Bruce's words giving meaning to them through a 16-year-old Pakistani kid.
Yes, sir, right here. Can you stand up, please?
What is Bruce?
This time last year, I had a director's cut, and Bruce had not really, he hadn't been involved very much at all, and he didn't ask to see the film. I felt that he really should see the film, because it was a heck of a responsibility, once he'd given us permission, to then take his songs, his legacy, and create a movie and picturise them in a way that would live up to not only his legacy, but would satisfy his fans around the world. Because it could have all gone very pear-shaped, with Springsteen fans around the world boycotting the movie and saying this is rubbish and what have you done to our hero and all this sort of stuff. So that was a very serious consideration. I had to really think about that. But what was great was the sincerity and the honesty of Javed's story, as based on Sarfraz's life. You know, that had a lot of integrity. And then I just had to make it work, as a director in terms of balancing the politics and the emotion and the storytelling. So when I showed it to Bruce, I was quite confident that he was going to like parts of it or like it. And then at the end of the screening, it was in a small room in a theatre in New York. At the end of the screening, he was watching it with a few managers, John Landau and a few other people. And at the end, there was absolute silence because the managers didn't want to say anything until Bruce spoke. Bruce didn't say anything because he was thinking about it. And I was in the back thinking, okay, this has gone tits up, as we say. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to the front, turn the lights on, get the tape, and go out so he can talk to his people. And as I went to the front, put the lights on, I saw him get up behind me, and he walked over, and he put his arms around me, and he gave me a big kiss, and he said, "Thank you for looking after me so beautifully.
Aww.
Don't change a thing. It's great." And then we sat down for an hour, and he went through every single thing that he really liked in the film, and it was wonderful. He said the kids are great. He really liked the actors. He said they pulled it off really well. He loved the use of all the other 80s music in the film. He had a bit of a laugh about Sarfraz, saying, yeah, he's the kid that kept turning up everywhere, and he said, oh yeah, he's here. He was over there, now he's here. So him and John Landau sort of were obviously, quite chuffed about that. And then the biggest thing for him, because he's not a man that talks about himself very much in glowing terms, and he certainly doesn't go on about his music and his words in that kind of way. He's a very ordinary man of the people, and he sees what he does as his job. He doesn't see himself as a rock idol as such, but he did really appreciate the way that the film took songs that he'd recorded in the 70s and had made them feel very relevant to today. And part of the reason for that was because the decision that I made to make the film now as a director, when I made the decision to make it, was 2017, and we had just had the news about Brexit in England, and it was very depressing because suddenly there was sort of mass xenophobia everywhere, and people thought that they could just get up and start abusing people of colour in public places. And so we had a bit of a civil sort of breakdown, and societal breakdown for a few weeks after Brexit was announced. And and I remember my dad, actually, before my dad died in 1999, he had an accident. And before my dad died, one of the things that really upset him, and it's the only time he ever said to me, you should get a bank account in India. Make sure you have some money in India. And that was because of what was going on in the former Yugoslavia. And ethnic cleansing was happening right on Europe's doorstep. And for my dad, that was really shocking. And although this wasn't the same thing, but it did remind me of that, I just thought, oh, things are sort of falling apart here, and I have to do something about it. I can't sit back. And that's when I said to Sarfraz, we're going to make this film. And I did a pass on the script with all my fears and anxieties about the potential of hate and the politics of Brexit. And that's why I think the film, it feels very relevant to today. Although we could never have imagined in the last year or so how relevant it would be to what's going on in certain countries. But there was a genuine attempt to say this is what happened in the 80s to us when we were growing up, and we're not going back there, and we don't want our world to be like that for our children. So we are going to make this film and show you an alternative way that we believe in. And luckily for us, Bruce's lyrics totally are part of that vision, where, as he says in the film, no one wins unless we all win. So see this film really as an antidote, I think, to what else is going on in the world right now.
And also, I want to say to this gentleman, Bruce Springsteen, think so highly of the movie that at last night's opening in Asbury Park, world premiere in Asbury Park, New Jersey, he showed up and he played music.
Ah, great.
Pictures are all online. Wonderful. We're all looking very excited.
Yes. Stand up.
Oh, my stand up. Sarfraz, I'm just wondering, now that like this would be like the culmination of your dreams, you've written a memoir that turned into a movie that Bruce Springsteen loves. Was there any part of you that says like, now what? And would you want to continue in the movie industry?
So you really depressed me.
Actually, Sarfraz, could you repeat her question so that
She's basically saying, what the fuck are you going to do next?
Now that your dream has come true.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. It is a fair point. To be honest, I don't quite know why I'm here, because after last night, I was like, I just need to come back to Britain. I've just had Springsteen turn up to our film premiere, and he's turned up to sing. So, I think the serious answer is that I think one should spend some time being grateful for what one has got to and what one has achieved as a collective. And if you spend too much time when you get to the top of a mountain trying to immediately think of the next mountain, I think you're not allowing yourself to just be present at what has happened. And this is a 30-year journey in my life, and this is a collective thing, not even just everybody here, but all the people who design the costumes and the hair and everything. So there will be time for that, and it partly actually, so partly I want to appreciate what one has got here. That's one thing. And the second thing is it kind of depends on you guys, because if nobody turns up to see the film, nobody's going to be interested in anything else. And so it's partly just about the fact of showing that a film that doesn't have, a superhero, as conventionally understood at least, and doesn't have, isn't Fast and Furious number 19, will people turn out? And if they turn up and show that you can make intelligent, interesting, thought-provoking, joyful films like this, if they turn up for that, then there might be appetite for further stories.
So what do you think the sequel might be?
I have an idea for a sequel. But I don't know if we can afford Viveik anymore.